The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Yes, we are staying in Georgia for the next couple of episodes and got a couple episodes after that. So you're just going to have to hang with us and enjoy our little road trip. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode at Brick Store Pub in Decatur. That was an amazing place to go to. Let me go ahead and tell you that. But for the next couple of episodes, we're going to be in Atlanta proper. And if you know anything about Atlanta, there was an old railroad track that has now been transformed into the BeltLine. The BeltLine is a paved path where people are walking and running and biking and jogging and rollerblading and even using those little powered rental scooters that you can like rent for a couple bucks every 15 minutes or so. It is definitely the place to be in Atlanta, and I don't think it ever quiets down. It's interesting because there's a lot of construction that is going up around the BeltLine. You're seeing a lot of offices, you're seeing a lot of apartments and condos, both new construction and old, bizarrely repurposed buildings, which is kind of funny. I'm pretty sure New Realm Brewing falls into the latter. I can't say that for certain, but it definitely kind of straddles the line between both of those. And New Realm Brewing is right on the BeltLine. The upstairs patio has an absolutely fantastic view of downtown Atlanta. And if you follow us on social media, especially on Instagram, you've probably seen those photos, and I'll probably have those photos up as well. Yes, we are going to New Realm Brewing, which is a very large brewing outfit and brew pub right on the BeltLine. They've got a couple of other locations that are in other states, but the home office, the main distribution center, is right in Atlanta. A couple people created it, but the person that I want to speak to, and the person that we're going to be talking to for the next couple of episodes, is a guy by the name of Mitch Steele. If you've heard the name before, I am not shocked, since he used to be the brewmaster at Stone Brewing out in Escondido, California, decided to switch back over to Eastern Standard Time and became the co-founder, brewmaster, and chief operating officer for New Realm, which is easily one of the biggest regional breweries in Atlanta, as I found on my trip. I got a lot to talk to him about, and we kind of ran the gamut. So between now and the next episode, you're going to hear a lot about his time at Stone, his time championing the IPA. In fact, he even wrote a book on IPAs, which I definitely recommend that you check out. We'll talk about New Realm Brewing, why they decided to go with the beers that they went with and the location that they went with, and kind of how Atlanta as a beer capital and beer focused city is, one of the big styles and one of the big things that are awesome about Atlanta. They also have a distillery. So a little bit later on, we'll talk about getting that up and running, why they decided to, some of the joys of doing that in Georgia. And obviously, Mitch has done a number of collaborations with a lot of different people, including bringing it back to Florida, Prison Pals in Doral. It's kind of one of the big reasons why I wanted to reach out to him, because hey, they're brewing with my friends. So I wanted to talk to him about the nature of collaborations, kind of how he feels about that and what he tries to do with every collaboration that he is with. Definitely make sure to come back next week for part 2. But In the meantime, here's part one of our interview with Mitch Steele, brewmaster, co-founder, and COO at New Realm Brewing in Atlanta, Georgia. So I will start off with the location in terms of Georgia, because you were just coming off a decade plus in California, obviously the last decade of which was at Stone Brewing. How do you transfer yourself from the West Coast to the Peach State?
Yeah, I get asked that a fair amount. So just as a little bit of background, my wife and I, when I was working for some other breweries, spent a fair amount of time on the East Coast, and we liked it a lot. And, when we first got approached about being part of the New Realm project, the discussion was centering the brewing operation somewhere in the Southeast. And that's a part of the country that I had never really explored a heck of a lot. And so it sounded exciting, and we know we like a lot about the Northeast, and we just wanted to check out the Southeast and see what it was all about. So it really, we were probably ready to move away from California. California's got a lot of issues with traffic and with, taxes and everything else. And it was just starting to wear a little thin. And yeah, so we picked up and moved to Atlanta, and it's been great. I love Atlanta. It's been a really fun experience to live here.
Awesome. And I know that you were, obviously being a co-founder of New Realm, you were involved in the project pretty early in terms of, deciding what the brewery's kind of focus and vision and everything was going to be. Starting from the ground up, obviously, you've got, for those of you that don't know, obviously the decade plus in Stone, and then before that, Anheuser-Busch, which is significantly bigger than both of those combined, probably. Mm-hmm. When you kind of have carte blanche with an entity like New Realm, how did you decide on the vision and the vibe and the structure of the location, the tap list, what you were going to release, and so on?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the location and everything, I got to give credit to our CEO, Kerry Falcone. He's the one that found it. He's the one that had the vision for what he wanted the tap room to look like and the areas to eat and drink. My role in this was to design a brewery in the space I was given. And Kerry had some ideas. So he and Bob had been scouting out locations, and Bob Powers is also a co-founder, and he and Kerry had been working together a little while before I got involved. So they had been looking at locations, and they had a very well-developed business plan, and they knew what they were looking for. And so for me, it was just, the question was, will the site work for a brewery? And how big of a brewery do we want to put in there? And so that's where I came in and started laying out the brewery and figuring out what to do. As far as the beers go, it's been an interesting process, because when we started, I used it as an opportunity to brew some beers that I had never been able to brew at Stone, like a real nice German Bavarian Pilsner, and things like that. So I kind of leaned into some classic beer styles as well as some IPA styles. And we realized pretty early on that there were some gaps in what our customers were looking for versus what we were doing. So we had to make some adjustments to the lineup, which is normal. I just didn't know the Atlanta market that well. And, certain things work better at our location than they do somewhere else. So, that was a learning process, and we had to make some shifts. But, I just wanted to have a wide variety of beers. That was really what I was looking to do.
And it's interesting because the location that you chose is basically right on the BeltLine, which I think used to be an old train track.
Yeah, it circled the entire city apparently, and it was an old train track, and there was a lot of industrial buildings along it because they would just load out their products onto these trains. And, and it was abandoned at some point. And the whole story of the BeltLine, I think, is kind of fascinating. It was a Georgia Tech master's thesis, the idea of turning the BeltLine or the old railroad tracks into a walking, jogging, biking path called the BeltLine. And, when we got to Atlanta, it was, still, it wasn't complete, and it's still not complete, although they've built out several sections since we came on board. But the area where we were was a pretty good stretch of very crowded, pedestrians on the BeltLine. So we walked into a pretty neat spot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, first of all, it's incredibly busy, even for just a regular, I think I was there on a Monday afternoon. It's packed, but it also has a very specific sort of crowd that comes to it. And a lot of the places around you, in fact, I think you're not too far down the BeltLine from a series of lofts and offices that used to be, I guess, a telephone repair center. Something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of reconverted buildings, definitely.
Yeah, so and it seems like New Realm is in and of itself a recently converted building, but the people that sort of are in that area are very, it seems to be the relatively young, late 20s, early 30s. If they are married, they just got married, not a whole lot of young kids. Do you find that the demographic of that area, especially the BeltLine, drives a lot of what people are wanting in terms of both the Atlanta tap room and distribution?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a huge factor. And I think, we had to spend some time learning what the folks that lived around us wanted to drink. And it's interesting. I at the time that I left Stone, if we weren't brewing IPAs, we weren't, everything had to be an IPA, right? And when we opened up 2 years later in Atlanta, the IPA thing was still there, but it was all about hazy IPAs. And, West Coast IPAs weren't really what people wanted. And so I had to make some changes. But I think definitely the clientele that comes into our place, our guests, they're all, like you said, by and large are younger, apartment living, walk to our facility. And so that definitely drives what we try to make available for them.
And I was going to say, it seems like you kind of got in at the right time, because I feel like having a facility the size of what New Realm has in Atlanta at a location that is becoming as desirable as the BeltLine is, if you were to try to do that now, property values would make the project almost unattainable, whereas you seem to have a very significant footprint. Has it been difficult to maintain a facility that needs to be the size that you have in Atlanta, but in a location that is basically hot real estate, the hot new place in Atlanta to be and live and be seen?
Yeah, I don't know if it's been difficult. It has been something that we're focused on, definitely. We've got a pretty good idea of what we want people to experience when they come in. We've had to do a little bit of work around the building. We're constantly trying to, the spot that we have, whether it's, adding tables or, adding the music stage or something like that, so we're continuous improvement is definitely part of the game, and that honestly, when we moved into the building, we were the only tenants in the building until you got down to the other end where there was a really nice restaurant and then the telephone lofts apartments. And so, now there's, a lot of people in there and a lot of people trying to get business and people to visit. And so it's become more competitive in that respect. And, so we've got to make sure that we always provide a great experience.
Gotcha. And with that experience, I've always been curious for Georgia, I guess, as a whole, but Atlanta specifically. Is there a style of beer that basically screams Atlanta? I've said for many years that if you go to Jacksonville, for example, everybody's going to have a cream ale. For some reason, it just seems to be the beer of Jacksonville. Do you see that in Atlanta? Is there anything that is like, no matter where I go, this is what's going to be hot. This is what people are definitely going to be brewing and drinking?
I think when I got here, the answer would have been no. I'm starting to see a lot of lagers in it. There's breweries that have opened up in the past couple of years that are focusing 100% on lagers. Just about every brewery has a Pilsner in their lineup. And that I think is a little surprising to me, with where I've come from, but I embrace it. I think it's great. I'm not sure you'd still call like a Pilsner a classic Atlanta, beer style. I think, the best-selling IPA when we came to Atlanta, and it still is, I think, Creature Comfort's Tropicalic, and that beer is everywhere. And I don't think there's a style that defines Atlanta. And one of the things that's really, really interesting and really fun about Atlanta is that there are breweries that have been established that do very different things from each other. There are several breweries that focus on lagers. There's breweries that focus on Belgian beers, breweries that focus on wood-aged beers. It's all over the map. And, we're just trying to, be part of that.
That's kind of amazing. But you're obviously not doing it in just at Atlanta, because New Realm has now 3 locations. You've got one in Charleston. And where's the third one? I apologize.
Virginia Beach.
Virginia Beach. Very different markets, very different locations, very different people. Do you find that the breweries have had to, each location has had to change kind of who they are to suit where they are? Or is it easy to keep the New Realm experience equal at all 3 of those locations?
So we try to do both. The menus in each of the restaurants is a little bit different depending on what's available locally. So Virginia Beach and Charleston tend to have a little more focus on seafood than Atlanta does. As far as beer styles go, there are certain beers that do very well in one location that may not, in the top 5 in the other 2 locations. So, Virginia Beach, for example, that's a large military area, and a lot of people who come to our brewery in Virginia Beach have spent time in Germany with the military and really developed a taste for German style beers. So those beers tend to do very well in Virginia Beach. In Atlanta and Charleston, lighter beers seem to do better, but Atlanta has, I don't know. There's sours do very well, kettle sours. So I think every location is different as far as what hits the top 2 or 3 beers that we sell, but there is a little bit of consistency there. And anything that most of our beers are available in all locations. The only exception is Charleston. Charleston has a 7-barrel brew house, and we have one brewer down there who's doing a great job, but a lot of his beers never leave the Charleston tap room. So if you go into Charleston and see, what Jeff has brewed down there, those are probably going to be unique to the Charleston tap room.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing, because this is very interesting, a lot of the beers and beer styles that you've named, whereas on the West Coast in general and Stone in specific was IPAs. I mean, you were sort of the king of IPAs for quite some time. You've been instrumental in releasing some of the most signature, sort of well-known and well-loved IPA styles and IPA beers coming out of Stone. Is it interesting to have to kind of switch gears a little bit coming into a market that is more interested in lagers and sours and more fruit flavors than sort of a good, heavy, Citra forward West Coaster?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, honestly, for me. I mean, with my time at Anheuser-Busch, I learned a lot about making lagers. Now, the lagers we make at New Realm are not anything like Anheuser-Busch beers, but, I learned a lot of really good techniques, and it's been fun to brew them. It's been really, one of our most awarded beers is our Pilsner, and that's, was a passion project of mine, because I couldn't brew a beer like that when I was at Stone. Now, Stone's come out with some lagers since I left, but, at the time, if it wasn't an IPA or an Imperial Stout, it was very hard to push across the finish line. So, yeah, it's been fun. And I've never brewed a Goza before or Berliner Weiss. So, I've had a lot of fun with that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's been a great experience.
And along those lines, I'm sure that there are other styles that you still have yet to brew. How often do you really get to do experimentation with having a tap list as varied as the locations have? But obviously, you've got to worry about 3 locations. You've got to worry about distribution and stuff. And really the brewing, the actual hardcore, get down to lifting bags of grain and stuff goes towards the brewmasters and brew staff that you've hired for each location.
Yeah. And, the experimentation piece happens a lot in Charleston and in Atlanta. Atlanta's equipped with a 20-barrel brew house. It's more of a production brew house, but we also have a 5-barrel pilot system there. So we're doing, style research, we're doing ingredient research, we're brewing prototypes at both of those breweries. And so it keeps it lively, it keeps it interesting and fun. And sometimes we'll just brew something because we want to, which is a great thing to be able to do. And if it does well in the tap room, we'll scale it up to a 20-barrel batch and try it there. So it's a kind of a neat process, and it's been fun. We always have a need for creativity and pushing the boundaries and trying new styles and things like that.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask about that. I would assume that the canned releases are, obviously not the cores, but sort of the one-offs. Do those all start off? They have to go through a small pilot batch that has to get released to the tap room, and if that works, then do something a little bit bigger and so on and so forth? Or is there still a lot of, these are the beers and the styles that we distribute, these are the beers and the styles that we put in the tap room, neither the twain shall meet?
Well, we have a lot of beers that never make it into distribution. The distribution game's tough, and our sales and marketing team are the ones that really drive what styles of beer we're going to make available to distribution, and that's based on feedback from our customers and our distributors. And we have plenty of creativity to develop those beers, and we can veto something if we think it's a really bad idea. But, in general, the beers that go into distribution, we serve all of those in our tap rooms, but we also have a nice, healthy mix of innovation products as well. So it's really kind of neat because, we approach the brewing for distribution a little bit differently than we approach the brewing for the tap room, where we can do more crazy things and take more risks and just see how people respond to it.
Have there been any beers that have just landed with a thud that don't move at all?
Yeah, there have been a few. And the one that really sticks out in my mind because I thought it was an excellent beer. I was really thrilled with it. We did a Belgian triple, and we did it as a special release. So it went into distribution in cans, and it just didn't move at all. And,
that's kind of
brewers
shocking.
that came by the brewery and tasted it were like, yeah, this is a wonderful triple. But yeah, we couldn't sell a drop of it, and that happens. It's disappointing when it happens, but it's part of the deal. And, we knew we had a good beer, so that was okay. We did a low carb, low cal IPA that did well for a few months, but really, really tailed off. And, that was, again, people really love the beer, but I just don't think, I still think that people, when they go into a grocery store or a liquor store and they're looking at beers, the alcohol content matters.
And I find that interesting because it seems like when I first started doing the blog and the podcast, a lot of people, especially at beer festivals, would get frustrated because they would only take a look at the alcohol by volume, want the highest number possible, and then drink that and move on, where it seems like the exact opposite is happening now, and people are looking for that number to be low and then kind of moving on from there.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as well. I'm seeing definitely an interest in lower alcohol beers, and we've done some of that work, and, I think it's important, and especially as beer drinkers get older, they don't necessarily have the ability to sit down and drink 3 double IPAs in a sitting, right? So,
exactly.
Having lighter offerings, I think, has been a great strategy. And I think it's something every brewery needs to think about doing if they're not already.
God, obviously, COVID and the economic turn has made things a little bit more difficult for breweries, and we continue to see. In fact, I just got a report of another brewery closure just today, unfortunately.
That's a shame. I'm seeing a lot of it.
I was going to say, have you seen a lot of it? Are there challenges that have been given to you and the team at New Realm that you have never seen before in the brewing industry? Because you've been through a lot, but I don't know if anybody's quite been through something like this.
Yeah, I think what's going on right now is unprecedented. I think it's very serious. I think a lot of breweries are struggling. The price of ingredients has gone through the roof. I mean, more than almost a 100% increase, not quite, but, definitely above 50% increase in malt prices from Europe. A lot of this has to do with the war in Ukraine, honestly, with energy prices going up in Europe because nobody's buying Russian natural gas anymore.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the domino effect that the economic things are having on the brewing industry. There's been CO2 shortages, shipping costs have gone through the roof. Whether you're shipping in a truck to a distributor or shipping across country or shipping, to another country, the costs and the time to get your beer to wherever it's going and get your ingredients to the brewery, it's skyrocketed. So a lot of breweries are really struggling, and landlords are increasing rents, and that's causing a lot of problems for a lot of brewers. It's really tough, and I think it's going to be tough for a little while, but it just kind of points out the need for breweries to have really solid business plans and not get themselves into a lot of debt if they can help it.
And that actually brings up another interesting point in mind is not only has the economy been affected, especially as COVID has gone around, and COVID is still here, obviously, but also COVID has definitely done a number on a lot of people that have had it, and especially since one of the big symptoms is a loss of smell and as sort of a domino effect, taste a little bit. Have you noticed in a lot of the people that are coming in, a lot of the patrons, that their tastes have changed, or certain things are a little bit more popular or less popular because of that particular aspect of things nowadays?
Hey, that's an interesting question. I will say I have not been made aware of anything like that. I think it's certainly possibly very real. I know some people that have had, COVID and have real long-term effects from it. Most of the people I've talked to that lost their sense of smell got it back within a month or so and were okay. But yeah, I have not seen the impact of that on what people are choosing to drink, really. If it's happening, I'm not aware.
Gotcha. Well, I will say one other thing that people are really choosing to drink, and it's something that New Realm has definitely jumped on, is more liquors, especially things like whiskeys and bourbons and so on. And I know that you have a bourbon, and it's fantastic, and I'm going to get to that conversation. But first, how did this particular conversation get started? Was a distillery always going to be part of the New Realm story, or is this something that's relatively recent?
Well, it happened after we started. Initially, we were going to be 100% a brewery, but what sparked the conversation was we do a lot of events in Atlanta. We host a lot of events. We bring companies in, doing parties and things like that, and people were turning us down because all we could serve, because of Georgia law, was beer that we made on site. And, we couldn't bring in spirits or wine or anything like that. So we started thinking about, okay, how do we fix this so that we get all these people that are interested in coming to actually commit to coming? And one of the ideas that came up was to get a spirits license and start making spirits. So, that's what we ended up doing. And it's turned into a pretty big deal for us. It's very popular. The cocktails, we've got a great distiller who's doing some really nice small batch spirits blends. And it's been a big hit. It surprised me, but, people's tastes are changing. And everything in the alcoholic beverage industry is somewhat cyclical. So things peak and valley, and I think spirits are in a peak mode right now. And so we definitely were aware and wanted to be part of it.
No, I completely agree. And I'm interested to hear about the process of getting that started, because you are technically distilling and brewing under the same roof physically. But if you take a look at your still, which is, you've got kind of beautiful picture windows on one of the, I guess, side meeting rooms that you have in the tap room, it's very obvious that it is specifically walled and doored off from where the brewery is. I would assume that the law had a lot to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. And you have to have a physical separation between the production facilities, and once so fermentation can happen in the brewery, but once it goes through the still, it has to be kept in a separate area. That room where the still was originally a barrel aging room, and we had barrels stacked to the ceiling in there, and we were aging beer on spirits barrels and things like that. And, when we started distilling, we had to make room for the still. And so we moved all that stuff out. And, it's been a neat thing. It's been a neat transition, and it's been very different than what I expected.
Awesome. So what did you decide to distill first? Because, obviously things like vodka and gin would be pretty easy, but like I mentioned before, you do have a bourbon, and that requires a significant amount of aging. How did that conversation get started as to who you were going to bring in to do it, what you were going to be doing, and so on?
Yeah, so we wanted to have a good bourbon. We wanted to have vodka, gin. We were kind of bouncing around the idea of doing some sort of agave spirit. We haven't gotten there yet, but it's coming. But yeah, we wanted to start with bourbon, gin, and vodka just because that's what people were asking for, and that's what excited us. And, so that's what we started with. And originally, we had a distillery in Savannah that was doing all the clear spirits for us. That was, the vodka and the gins. And then the bourbon was an Atlanta product. And, when we ended up shutting down Savannah last year, we had to move everything up to Atlanta.
Interesting. And I kind of want to use this to talk about the tap list in the tap room in Atlanta, which I found interesting because obviously it's got the beers, but you also serve 1.5 and 2 ounce pours of the liquors. And you also have mixed drinks using the New Realm distilled products. And you've sort of given them equal footing on the screens and on the menus. Is that something that you wanted to make sure to sort of keep them equal? Do you treat a lot of the cocktails conceptually very similar to how you treat the beers? What is your kind of vision when it comes to presentation like that?
Yeah, so the equal footing part of it is fairly recent, and it really happened kind of naturally because of the popularity of what we were doing with the spirits. The first year or two, they were kind of, down at the bottom of the menu, and we realized that we had a lot of people coming in that wanted cocktails. So we decided to make it a little bit more visible, and the cocktail mixes, every tap room that we have does it a little bit differently. There's a lot of creative freedom with our restaurant staff, our bartending staff to do neat things with the cocktails. So it's been fun because there's been some really creative stuff happening, and it's fun to see what people are thinking and what people are enjoying.
And I would assume traditionally with the brew pub, and this is what I will definitely ask, is with the menu, with the food menu, there's usually a lot of synergy between the food and the beers. Is that something that obviously New Realm does? And adding in liquors and cocktails that are kind of specific to each location, does that make that pairing a little bit more robust or difficult to achieve?
Honestly, I think it makes it a little more difficult because not many people at New Realm have a lot of experience with pairing spirits with foods. So we're just trying things and seeing what works. Certainly the initial menu that we had in Atlanta was definitely a brewery-based food menu. There's food that typically goes really well with different types of beers, but over time it's kind of evolved, and our executive chefs in each location get to do limited releases a few times a year, and they just get creative with it. And if the dish works, we just keep it. And there's been a few of those, and it's been, I think, kind of the takeaway from this is that everybody has an opportunity to be creative with what we're offering to our guests. And I think not just the beer, but the cocktails, the food. And, we have certain guidelines that we have for food as we do for beer. But in general, I think celebrating the creativity and the talent of the team we have is pretty important.
And I definitely can say, especially, obviously I haven't been to Charleston and Virginia Beach yet, but the Atlanta food is absolutely fantastic, with a very big culinary team. So it is definitely chef driven. But one of the things that I guess I was a little bit amazed on was how many Asian inspired dishes there were. Definitely not something I expected in Atlanta. No, I probably should have. I haven't really seen anything like that in a brewery as well. Is that, I guess, what is sort of the inspiration behind that? I find that rather interesting.
Yeah, well, Atlanta's a very cosmopolitan city. I mean, there's a huge Asian population, a huge Mexican population here, Cuban, Puerto Ricans. It's really a melting pot, and I don't think people look at Atlanta that way. But it's been fun, for me moving here and having all these food options all around my house is really cool. So I think people that dine out in Atlanta are looking for things that might have a little bit of an international flair to them. And, this is something that we've kind of evolved into over the last few years, but, we've got, shrimp tacos, and we've got birria tacos, and, the Asian fries, and it's everything that we've done that's been kind of internationally inspired has been really well received. So we keep trying it.
Gotcha. Awesome. Another thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about, switching gears, and why I definitely wanted to get you on the Florida Beer podcast is because last year you actually made another trip down here. I'm assuming that was not your first trip to Florida, but you came in to do a collaboration brew day with our friends at Prison Pals in Doral.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk about collaborations for a little bit, because you are definitely no stranger to this. Before we had this interview, I was listening to a story that you told about your old Stone days and brewing stuff with Pizza Port and so on. And I guess in terms of a collaboration, how do you decide who you're going to collaborate with, how that communication is really going to get started? You've been in the industry long enough to where I would assume you would be one of those dream collaborators that almost any brewery would want to work with.
It's, for us hosting collaborations, it usually starts with a friendship and a respect for somebody else's beer. So, honestly, all the collaborations I've done, we had a couple of rules. Number one, they had to be great people. And number two, they had to have great beer. And, this business is so, craft brewing, there's so much camaraderie that there's no shortage of really cool people that you might like to bring into your brewery and brew a batch of beer with. And so I've always approached it from the standpoint of, whether I'd like to spend, a few hours developing a recipe with these people, and whether I'd like to spend a day with them in the brewery. And that is really what kind of drives who we pick to collaborate with. I will say, the Prison Pals one was fun because I was not aware of them as a brewery, and the person who put me in contact with them was Pete Schlossberg from Pete's Wicked Ale, who's an old friend of mine.
Interesting.
He travels a lot in South America, and he got to know Juan and Diego when they were down there, and then they moved up and started this brewery, and he did a collaboration with them, and then reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming and hanging out with us for a few days and doing a collaboration beer?" And I talked with Juan and Diego and decided I would like to do it. But Pete's recommendation had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, they are definitely great guys. I love Prison Pals, but
the hospitality was amazing. I mean, they really rolled out the red carpet for us, and I had the best time. It was just wonderful.
I think what few people realize is stepping outside and you are so close to the planes as they come in for a landing at MIA that everything shakes.
Yes, that's true. I remember that.
So with collaborations, you've been around the block for quite some time. Do you still end up learning a thing or two when you do a collaboration, even now?
Always. And, I like to tell people all the time, anytime I put a beer together with another brewer, I pick up something, because everybody has their own techniques and their own tricks or own favorite ingredients or anything like that. So, it's always something that I take away something new. And, it could be just something really minor, like a process aid or a cleaning chemical or a fermentation profile, or it could be just really out there. And that's a fun part about it. And, I'm a person who believes that if I'm not learning something, I've become stagnant. And so, when I get to do something with somebody else and pick something up, that's a success for me.
Awesome. But with collaborations, if I could be a little bit cynical for a second, how much of it is also marketing? Obviously Prison Pals, I wouldn't see this, but with some other breweries, I would assume that they would want to get together just so they can have the pretty pictures for Instagram and, have each other's names and hopefully spread the name and about the brewery and whatnot. Do you see collaborations for a marketing purpose as being a good use of the time and of the, resources? Or do you think a lot of breweries do that?
Yeah, I think we all do that to some extent. The level of which that's the focus of the collaboration is quite variable, and there are collaborations we've done just because I like the people and they were in town and we just decided to do something. There are collaborations we've done that we thought would be, make a nice splash, and make an impact. And, you just got to make sure that you don't do it just for that sake. It's again, I go back to, are they good people? Do they make great beer? Do they have the same, similar core values or business ethics that we do? If that's the case, and it helps us from a marketing standpoint too, that's just a bonus.
And keeping on the similar theme, one of the interesting things that I've noticed from a marketing, from an outreach sort of standpoint that I've never seen before from any other brewery are your cans. With the cans, every single one of them has your picture and a QR code leaning to basically, here's how beer is made. I would say, is that education portion of which, I guess, let me backtrack. How did that become an idea? Because label art is finite. There's only so much space. And obviously you've got some things that you have to put on there, federally required, of course. Yeah. How did that communicate? How did that idea kind of get off the ground?
So that was a marketing initiative. And the original idea was to have the QR code on the can that people could access through their phone and get information on the specific beer that they were drinking. And, it was just a way of telling the story, because I still think, even as big as craft brewing has gotten, the most important thing about a beer is the story behind it and how it came about and why it's an interesting product and why people should try it. And, the whole idea of putting, that illustration of me on the can came after. But yeah, it's one of those things that, we thought it would help us, with brand awareness and getting people to get a better understanding of who we were as a brewery. And that was important.
I was going to say, is there a large portion of marketing or consumer goodwill that goes into a project like that, and education about how craft beer is made in general?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's been so important for so long. And I think people started losing sight of it, but now you've got a whole new generation of people coming into your tap rooms and trying your beers, and the education piece never goes away. What makes an Irish stout an Irish stout? That's, the history of that and the ingredients. And, I still think there are people that are interested in learning a little bit about that kind of thing.
That's kind of awesome. And I definitely saw that. It looks like you've got a beautiful sort of overhead catwalk for tours at the Atlanta location. I'm assuming that was built intentionally.
It was, we had a tour program that we stopped when COVID hit, and then we just haven't been able to get it kicked back open again. But, the one thing that I asked when we were designing the brewery, that we not do tours on the brewery floor when we were operating the brewery, just because it's not safe, and so the idea came to do the catwalk, and it's been great because we can, groups can have events that go out on the catwalk. They'll set up cocktail tables and, draft systems and things like that. And so it's designed as a self-guided tour, but we use it for so much more than that. And it's kind of a neat part of the brewery, I think.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool, and it's very cool looking. Everything about the brewery is actually really, really neat, and it's just a fantastic place to go because great food, great beverages, absolutely phenomenal. With the impending things that are kind of going on in the craft industry, but also a really great location and great beers, what do you kind of see as the future for New Realm in the forthcoming years?
Well, we're actively searching for some more locations. The tap rooms have been a very good business move for us. And so, we're in the process of trying to build out a brewery in Greenville, South Carolina. We've got a couple of other irons in the fire that haven't been fully committed to yet. But, our idea when we started New Realm was to have breweries in various cities in the Southeast. And so, we don't have a brewery in North Carolina yet. We don't have a brewery in Florida yet. We don't have a brewery in Tennessee yet. Those are all on the list, and we're not going to do it unless it's the right situation, but we've got our eyes open and we're actively looking for opportunities. So, the idea is, every one of our spots is different from each other. It's not like you're walking into a chain of breweries and every single one of them looks the same. They're all very different from each other. The beer selection's different. The food selection's different. So, it's more about becoming, being a local part of the communities that we build in and really celebrating the area we're in. And I think that's been a good thing for us. It certainly was the plan from the beginning, before I even came on board, was to be that kind of a brewery. And, so we're looking for opportunities like that.
That's awesome. Well, more power to you, Mitch Steele. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and it was amazing to have you on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This was a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
So like I said, a lot of great stuff in that interview. We've got some more great stuff that's coming on, but you're going to have to wait until next week. So make sure to follow us on everything so you know when that episode comes out. We are on social media at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter. We're at FL Beer Blog on Facebook, on the internet at floridabeerpodcast.com and obviously floridabeerblog.com. Or you can email us at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. We are also a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find out about all the other shows that are on the network by going to floridapodcastnetwork.com, or you can even go to FPN Insiders. It's our closed Facebook group, and by joining, you'll be able to get all the latest information as soon as you possibly can. Make sure to follow us on the podcasting app of your choice. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and if it's possible for you to leave a review, please do so. It really does help us out, and the more 5-star reviews we get, the easier it is for people to find us and search for us, and we can continue to send out great information and tell great stories and do great interviews on upcoming episodes. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Our field producer is Steve Picala. And executive producer of the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jimmy Lagonier. This is David Butler, your host and author. Make sure to come back next week for round 2 with Mitch Steele. In the meantime, crack that beer, have a great day, and drink Florida Craft.